Hey folks, it's me, Dr. Mike. Welcome to the Targeting the Muscle series. How do we feel the target muscle more and get it hit more and stimulated more and grow more from, drumroll, stiff-legged deadlift? The target is les hamstrings, as the French say. French viewers, I'm sorry to butcher your language. How do we do it? The first tip we have is to arch your lower back. So, what does that mean? Yes, you could do a stiff-legged deadlift just by bending over and coming back up. But what we want is to make the stiff-legged deadlift very limited by the hamstrings so that we don't have to do as much bending as would be required if we didn't pre-stretch the hamstrings. So what we're gonna do here is take our position, and before starting, we arch the lower back. It's not the lower back arching we want, it's the tilting of the pelvis anteriorly. We have the posterior tilt, we have the anterior tilt. And if we tilt anteriorly, it pre-stretches our hamstrings such that when we tilt anteriorly and then we begin to descend, you very shortly, I'm already feeling it, feel a deep, painful stretch in the hamstrings. That's amazing, that's what we want. What we don't want is to round our back and go down, because right now I still don't feel my hamstrings and I don't feel them, I already hit rock bottom. So what you want to do is arch your back nice and tight, not the whole thing, you don't have to keep your chest super sky high. You can if you want, but really it's that pushing the butt back, arching that lower back, and then starting to descend and making sure that as you descend, your back doesn't round over. As you descend, you are still keeping that back arch, and you'll feel instantly the tension hamstrings go down his knee, ow, 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 and then come back up. Folks, question, why do I have one of my pant legs rolled up? Because I'm in a gang. But the other reason is because I want to demonstrate super important feature of stiff-legged deadlifts to actually hit the hamstrings. It is keeping the knee straight, keeping it from bending. Remember that the hamstring crosses two joints, the hip joint and the knee joint. So if we do our first tip and arch nice and hard, we can make sure that the hamstrings are nice and tight because we've pre-stretched at the hip. But as we go down, if we bend our knees, which is super tempting because it lets you lift more weight, it feels less bad, what ends up happening is all of the length we generate at the hamstrings at the hip is gotten rid of at the knee because the hamstring shortens there, and then we can go down nice and low and not feel diddly dick. What we have to do is have an athletic posture for the knee. You don't want to lock it out because that could be a little iffy. Just shy of lockout, pretty straight knees. And then as you are moving your hips back and bending at the hips, you want to make sure your knees are not going forward. So you want to keep the knees back, and that's the cue, is knees back, knees back, knees back. And oh shit, I can already tell there's a ton of tension in my hamstring. If I do this, the tension goes away. We don't want it to go away. We want it to stay. So keeping the knees back and lower back arched. If you can do both at the same time, that right there, those are the two biggest cues for the hamstring, but they're not the only ones. We have more. Next tip for feeling your hamstrings a lot. Of course, the two fundamental tips we've already gone over are arching the lower back and keeping the knees stable, keeping them from tracking forward. Arching the lower back can be tough in the sense that proprioceptively, your body's awareness of where it is in space, for some of us less athletically challenged people, it can be tough to figure out if that's actually going on. There's a lot of load, who the fuck knows what's going on? One easy cue you can use, and you don't have to use it, but can be helpful for many people, is chest up, especially at the bottom of the lift. When we do stiff-legged deadlift, if we're trying to do a good job, sometimes we're doing a fine job, but then our chest starts to droop forward, our back rounds, tension is no longer in the hams, it's now in the lower back. Not a bad thing, but great lower back exercise, not so good for the hams. So what we want to do is, as we are moving back and as we are, to quote Jared Feather, pointing our butthole up into the sky, keeping our knees back, it could also help us to remind ourselves at the bottom, chest up, chest up, chest up, chest up. Because you're keeping your chest up instead of down, your back can stay flat, the tension is in the hams, and all good things occur just like that. All right, now that your technique is really set in, a big thing is the stiff-legged deadlift hits the hamstrings fundamentally, primarily, by milking the eccentric stretch. And it's very difficult to do that if you're descending very quickly. So my recommendation to you, if you really have trouble feeling your hamstrings, Arch that lower back, keep the chest up, keep the knees nice and straight. And as you descend, go slow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up. Coming up fast is awesome, no big deal. And then again, descend slow. Knees back, chest up, tummy out, and up again. That slowness is gonna make sure of two things. One, you're applying eccentric overload well and not just skipping it by going down really fast. Two, at every moment, at every second, you can ask yourself, am I feeling the tension through the hams, through a painful stretch? If the answer is no, you go, oh shit, that's right, because my knees came forward. You push them back and you go, oh, now I feel it. By taking it slow on every rep, we can correct the rep internally, inside that rep, and making sure every rep is quality. Next tip, very related, kind of bringing all the other tips together, is constant internal cueing. Yes, you can remember these things before you start and then do them and after watch your video and go, I fucked up, I didn't do chest up. So what I like to do is use 3 cues. Knees back, chest up, oops, tummy out. Tummy out, I'm still nice and tight, but I push my tummy out, that directly allows me to arch my lower back. I repeat those 3 cues in my head to myself as I go. Like, okay, tummy out, chest up, knees back. Am I still doing it? Yes. Chest up, tummy out, knees back, yes. The entire time, tummy out, knees back, chest up, boom. Because under a crazy amount of load or under crazy fatigue, it can be easy to forget 1 or 2 of those cues. And the way this system works is that your back needs to be a rigid body and your whole leg needs to be a rigid body. That's how the hamstrings work best. If you forget to do one of those things, if you droop your chest a lot, if you let your tummy droop down, if you push your knees forward, that system breaks down, not in a bad way, just in a way that you're not really training your hamstrings much anymore. So constant repetition of those cues is its own tip, because most of the time in many exercises, while you're doing the movement, you're just kind of settling in there and doing stuff. You may cue yourself beforehand, and the movement occurs so fast, maybe between reps or a couple times during the set you'll cue. With the hamstrings, you can internally cue during every single rep. If you need the help, it works super, super great. The last tip is to find your best depth. It's a little bit tricky to find because it is the confluence of 2 things happening at the same time. Thing number 1 is you are going sufficiently deep to stretch your hamstrings painfully. You guys will notice my arms are like this. It's just a reflex from pulling. They can be like that, it's totally fine. So if your hamstrings are still stretched, that's awesome. Painful stretch is good. The second thing is if you go low enough, your hamstrings can still feel like they're stretching, but a little less, and then you start moving at the back and your knees come forward. So yes, more depth is good, point 1, but only when your hamstrings are the limiting factor in being painfully stretched all the way through. If you go down so low that your pain is maximum, you're doing good. As soon as you descend a little lower and you're like, oh, that's actually easier on hamstrings, come up, remember that depth, go down again and hit that depth where the pain is maximum. As soon as you're not stretching the hamstrings painfully anymore, that means they're probably not the limiting factor, they're not taking a ton of stimulus. You may notice that if you go deeper in stiff-legged deadlifts, you actually get less sore on the hamstrings than if you go shallower but keep the tension on the hamstrings. This is one of those things where active range of motion is actually a valid concept and total super duper full range of motion may no longer target the muscle. So as long as you're feeling painful tension on the hamstrings and you're not using other parts or other joints to make up the range of motion, you're doing super well for yourself. Folks, that's all the tips. The next time I see you, your hamstrings better take up worlds and entire civilizations will collapse at the mere thought of your hamstrings.